am 71 years old, and for 42 years I've carried the weight of knowing that my mother's dream of starting fresh after divorce led to the most beautiful coexistence between species that has ever existed, and how my teenage selfishness destroyed a family whose only crime was choosing trust over the isolation that had kept them safe for generations. Before this emphysema takes what little breath I have left, I need someone to know about my mother, Janet Morrison, about the summer of 1982, when she bought an abandoned cabin in the Adirondack Mountains that nobody wanted, completely unaware that she was purchasing a home that was already occupied by the most gentle souls who ever walked these ancient forests. My name is Michael Morrison, and back then I was a sullen 15-year-old who resented being dragged away from my friends in Albany to live in what I saw as the middle of nowhere, because my recently divorced mother had decided that city life was corrupting both our souls and our bank account. Mom was 38, a high school teacher whose divorce settlement had left her with just enough money to buy property that other people considered worthless, a deteriorating log cabin on 40 acres of wilderness, so remote that the nearest neighbor lived 12 miles away. "We're going to build something beautiful together," Mom told me while we drove up the overgrown access road that led to what would become our home for the next 3 years. No more apartment noise, no more pollution, no more pretending that we need all the things that modern life tells us are essential. We're going to discover what it really means to be alive. What my mother never expected was that our fresh start would become an extraordinary lesson in sharing space with beings whose intelligence and compassion surpassed anything we'd encountered in human civilization. The family that was already living in our cabin, a Bigfoot clan consisting of 2 adults and 3 children, had been using the property as their permanent residence for 8 years, ever since the previous human owner had died and left the structure abandoned to the elements. Elder and Sage, those became the names Mom gave to the adult pair, though their real names in their own language were complex vocalizations that sounded like wind through ancient trees, had been maintaining the cabin better than any human caretaker could have managed. They'd repaired the roof with materials that blended seamlessly with original construction, improved the foundation to prevent water damage, and created living spaces that accommodated both their larger frames and their cultural need for family privacy. Their children, Pine, River, and Dawn, ranged in age from what appeared to be 5 to 12 in human years, but they demonstrated intelligence and maturity that challenged everything I thought I knew about childhood development. They spoke among themselves in their natural language while also understanding significant amounts of English they'd learned by observing previous human visitors to their territory. The first encounter happened on June 20th, 1982, 3 days after we'd moved our belongings into what we thought was an empty cabin. I woke up around midnight to use the bathroom and found Elder sitting calmly at our kitchen table, examining the books Mom had unpacked while we slept. He looked up at my approach with eyes that held depths of wisdom and kindness, and instead of fleeing or showing aggression, he gestured toward an empty chair and a clear invitation to join him. For 20 minutes, Elder and I sat together in our kitchen, communicating through gestures and expressions while he demonstrated his ability to understand written English by pointing to words and pictures that interested him. When Mom woke up and found us together, her reaction wasn't fear or shock. It was the immediate recognition that we'd been privileged to encounter intelligence that deserved respect rather than exploitation. "You've been taking care of this place," Mom said to Elder, her voice carrying the gratitude of someone who understood that we owed our comfortable shelter to his family's labor and dedication. "We didn't know anyone was living here. We don't want to force you to leave your home because we were ignorant about who belonged here first." What followed was the most extraordinary negotiation in human history, as my mother and Elder worked out arrangements for sharing space that honored both our species' needs, while creating opportunities for cultural exchange that would enrich all our lives. For 3 years, from 1982 to 1985, 2 families learned to live together in harmony that transcended every boundary science claimed existed between human and non-human consciousness. But our paradise was built on secrecy that would ultimately destroy everyone we loved. The Bigfoot family's survival depended on remaining hidden from human civilization, which meant that I couldn't tell anyone about the most important relationships of my teenage years. The isolation that was supposed to heal our family after divorce became the foundation of lies that would tear apart bonds stronger than anything biology could create. The tragedy began with my own selfishness. By age 18, I was desperate for connection with other humans, tired of keeping secrets that prevented normal friendships and romantic relationships. When Sarah Williams, a girl from the nearest town, showed interest in visiting our remote cabin, I made a choice that would haunt the remainder of my life. I told her about our housemates. I betrayed the trust of beings who'd shown us nothing but kindness, who'd shared their knowledge and culture while depending on our discretion for their survival. My need for teenage romance overcame the loyalty I owed to family members who'd never done anything except love and protect us. The federal agents who came for Elder's family on August 15, 1985, had been guided to our location by Sarah's father, a state trooper who'd contacted authorities about unusual large primate activity reported by his daughter. What they found was evidence of interspecies cooperation that challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligence, consciousness, and the potential for peaceful coexistence between human and non-human peoples. June 20th, 1982, was our third night in the Adirondack cabin, and I was still adjusting to the profound silence of wilderness living after 15 years of city noise that had made sleep a constant battle against sirens, traffic, and neighbor disputes that echoed through thin apartment walls. The forest quiet was so complete it felt alive, pressing against the cabin like something conscious and watchful, making every small sound seem amplified and significant. I woke around midnight needing to use the bathroom, navigating through unfamiliar rooms by moonlight that filtered through windows my mother hadn't yet covered with the curtains she'd brought from our Albany apartment. The cabin felt different in darkness, larger somehow, with shadows that suggested spaces and corners that didn't exist during daylight hours, when everything seemed smaller and more manageable. That's when I saw him sitting at our kitchen table, a massive figure silhouetted against the pale light that came through the window above our sink. My first reaction was terror that we'd been invaded by someone who'd been watching our cabin, waiting for the right moment to steal whatever valuables new residents might have brought to such an isolated location. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, details emerged that challenged every assumption I'd made about what kinds of beings might exist in the Adirondack wilderness. The figure was enormous, easily 8 feet tall even while seated, with proportions that suggested incredible physical strength, combined with careful, deliberate movements that spoke of intelligence rather than random animal behavior. Elder, though I wouldn't learn that name until the following day, was examining one of my mother's books with the focused attention of someone who understood that written language contained information worth studying. He held the book carefully, turning pages with remarkable dexterity despite hands that were twice the size of any human's, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed like responses to whatever he was reading. When he noticed my approach, Elder looked up with eyes that held no aggression or fear, only curiosity about the young human who'd discovered him in what had clearly been his space long before we'd arrived. For maybe 30 seconds, we stared at each other across the kitchen that had suddenly become a meeting ground between species that weren't supposed to be able to coexist peacefully. Then Elder gestured toward an empty chair, a movement so unmistakably welcoming that I found myself sitting at my own kitchen table, as a guest of someone whose very existence challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. Up close, I could see that his face combined human intelligence with features adapted for survival in wilderness environments. Broader nose for processing forest air, more pronounced jaw for different dietary requirements, but eyes that reflected thought patterns and emotional depths that were heartbreakingly familiar. He continued examining my mother's book, a collection of nature photography that documented Adirondack wildlife, pointing to images and making sounds that were clearly attempts at communication. When he showed me a photograph of a black bear and made questioning sounds while pointing toward the forest outside, I understood that he was asking about the animals that shared these mountains with his family. Bears? Yes, I said carefully, unsure whether he could understand English but hoping that tone and context might convey meaning, even if specific words were unfamiliar. Black bears. They live in these forests, but they usually avoid people unless they're protecting cubs or competing for food sources. Elder's response was immediate and remarkable. He nodded in a way that demonstrated complete comprehension, then made elaborate gestures that clearly indicated he and his family had established territorial arrangements with local bear populations, agreements that prevented conflicts while ensuring that all species could access the resources they needed for survival. Our conversation continued for almost 20 minutes, conducted entirely through gestures, expressions, and the occasional word that Elder seemed to recognize from English he'd absorbed through observation of previous human visitors. He showed me photographs of plants and animals, indicating which ones his people considered medicine, which were food sources, and which represented dangers that required careful avoidance. Most remarkably, Elder demonstrated artistic appreciation for the photography itself, lingering over images that captured particularly beautiful compositions or moments of animal behavior that revealed personality and intelligence. He clearly understood that humans created visual representations of the natural world for purposes beyond mere documentation, that art could convey emotional truths about our relationships with the ecosystems that sustained all life. When my mother woke up and found us together, her reaction established the tone for everything that would follow during our 3 years of shared residence. Instead of panic or demands that Elder leave our property, she approached slowly with obvious respect for someone who'd been caring for the cabin we now called home. "Thank you for taking such good care of this place," she said, while Elder stood to his full height, demonstrating the magnificent presence that characterized everything about his bearing. "We didn't know anyone was living here when we bought the property. We don't want to force you and your family to find new homes because we were ignorant about who belonged here first." Elder's response revealed both his remarkable intelligence and his equally remarkable capacity for forgiveness toward humans who might have demanded that he leave immediately. Instead of anger or territorial aggression, he showed gratitude for my mother's respectful acknowledgement of his prior claim, while indicating willingness to consider arrangements that might allow both our families to benefit from shared occupancy. He gestured toward the cabin's structural improvements, reinforced supports, weatherproofing, and maintenance that had preserved the building during 8 years of abandonment. Then he pointed toward the forest, making sounds and movements that clearly indicated his family's extensive knowledge about resources, dangers, and survival techniques that could benefit human residents who respected their expertise. "You're offering to teach us," my mother realized, her voice filled with wonder at the possibility of learning wilderness skills from beings who'd mastered forest living in ways that human civilization had forgotten. "You want to share this space and help us understand how to live properly in your territory." The formal introduction to Elder's entire family happened the following evening, when my mother prepared a dinner large enough to accommodate what she'd correctly assumed were additional household members who'd been observing our first encounter from concealed positions throughout the cabin. Elder had spent the day demonstrating respect for our privacy by remaining in areas we hadn't specifically claimed, but it was clear that our property was home to more than just the single individual we'd met. Sage emerged first, moving through our cabin with the grace of someone completely familiar with every room and corner. She was slightly smaller than Elder, but equally magnificent, with dark brown fur that showed silver highlights and eyes that held depths of maternal wisdom that reminded me immediately of my own mother's protective instincts. Her presence transformed the cabin's atmosphere from simple cohabitation into something approaching extended family gathering. The children followed, Pine, River, and Dawn, each demonstrating personality traits that would become increasingly distinct as I learned to know them as individuals rather than simply young Bigfoots. Pine, the eldest at approximately 12, showed the serious demeanor of someone who understood he was being groomed for adult responsibilities within his community. River, maybe 8, had the infectious curiosity that made him eager to explore everything human civilization had brought to their territory. Dawn, the youngest at perhaps 5, possessed an artistic sensitivity that drew her to my mother's books, music, and decorative objects with obvious appreciation for beauty and creativity. "Welcome to our home," my mother said as the family arranged themselves around our kitchen table, her words acknowledging that we were guests in their space, rather than hosts entertaining visitors. "We're honored to meet you, and grateful for the opportunity to learn from people who understand this land better than we ever could." The dinner that followed became the template for hundreds of evening meals that would sustain our unconventional family over the next 3 years. Elder and Sage contributed food they'd gathered from the forest, nuts, berries, roots, and medicinal plants that my mother learned to prepare according to recipes that had been refined over generations of Bigfoot culinary tradition. We shared human foods that fascinated the children, particularly processed items they'd never encountered during their isolated forest existence. But more important than nutrition was the cultural exchange that happened around our shared table. Elder and sage began teaching my mother and me about wilderness survival techniques that surpassed anything available in human outdoor education. They showed us how to predict weather changes days in advance by reading subtle environmental cues that meteorology had never documented. They taught us about medicinal applications of plants that could treat injuries and illnesses more effectively than anything available in rural pharmacies. Most remarkably, they shared knowledge about animal behavior and communication that revealed the Adirondack ecosystem as a complex social network where every species maintained relationships and agreements that ensured sustainable resource distribution. Through elders' patient instruction, I learned to recognize the calls that different animals used to warn about dangers, announce discoveries of food sources, and maintain territorial boundaries that prevented conflicts. Forest is like village, Elder explained in the slowly improving English that my mother encouraged him to develop through daily conversation practice. Every family has place, every family has work, every family helps others when help is needed. Humans forget this because they live in boxes separated from other life. But forest people remember what cooperation means. The children's education became a joint project that enriched all our lives while demonstrating remarkable compatibility between human and Bigfoot learning styles. My mother, drawing on her experience as a high school teacher, created lesson plans that combined traditional academic subjects with wilderness knowledge that Pine, River, and Dawn shared from their own cultural education. Mathematics lessons involved calculating sustainable harvesting rates for forest resources. Literature discussions included oral traditions that preserved Bigfoot history and spiritual beliefs through stories that had been passed down for countless generations. Dawn's artistic abilities emerged through exposure to human creative materials, paper, pencils, and paints that allowed her to express visual concepts that her people typically conveyed through three-dimensional forest arrangements. Her drawings revealed sophisticated understanding of anatomy, botany, and ecosystem relationships that surpassed anything I'd encountered in formal biology classes. More than technical accuracy, her art conveyed emotional connections to the natural world that made viewers understand forest consciousness as something alive and responsive, rather than simply decorative background. River's mechanical aptitude became apparent when he began examining and improving our cabin's infrastructure with innovations that combined human technology with Bigfoot engineering principles. He modified our wood stove to burn more efficiently while producing less smoke that might attract unwanted attention. He improved our water collection system to provide cleaner, more reliable access to the springs that supplied our household needs. Most impressively, he created camouflage systems that could conceal evidence of Bigfoot presence when circumstances required maintaining the illusion that only humans occupied our property. Pine's leadership development revealed itself through his assumption of responsibility for teaching me survival skills that would ensure my safety during solo explorations of territory that contained dangers I was too inexperienced to recognize independently. He showed me how to move through dense forest without leaving obvious trails that might guide hostile visitors to our location. He taught me to recognize and avoid plants that could cause serious injury to someone unfamiliar with their properties. Most importantly, he helped me understand my role as protector of family secrets that could destroy everyone I loved if shared with the wrong people. But the most profound aspect of our shared life was emotional rather than practical. Elder and Sage became surrogate parents whose wisdom complemented my mother's guidance in ways that enriched my development as a person capable of recognizing intelligence and consciousness, regardless of their biological manifestations. The children became siblings whose friendship transcended species boundaries, while teaching me about loyalty, cooperation, and the kind of love that chooses protection over personal convenience. For 3 years, our cabin became proof that interspecies coexistence was not only possible, but profoundly beneficial for all participants. We created something unprecedented in human history, a genuinely integrated family that honored both human and Bigfoot cultural values, while building new traditions that belonged uniquely to our extraordinary household. Living with the Bigfoot family required absolute commitment to maintaining secrecy that became increasingly difficult as I approached adulthood and began craving connections with the human world that lay beyond our isolated sanctuary. By 1985, when I was 18 and preparing for what should have been normal transitions to college and independent life, the weight of protecting our family secret had begun to feel like imprisonment rather than the privilege I'd recognized during our first years together. The practical challenges of concealment had intensified as Pine, River, and Dawn grew larger and more active, making their presence in our cabin detectable to anyone who visited with sufficient observational skills. Elder and Sage had developed elaborate protocols for hiding when supply delivery trucks approached our property, or when my mother needed to make her monthly trips to town for materials we couldn't produce through wilderness living. But the logistics of concealing 5 large beings who'd made our cabin their permanent home required constant vigilance that affected every aspect of our daily routines. More challenging was the emotional toll of isolation that prevented me from developing normal relationships with peers who lived in the conventional human world. I couldn't invite friends to visit our cabin, couldn't explain why I possessed wilderness survival knowledge that surpassed anything available through standard outdoor education, and couldn't participate in social activities that might lead to questions about our family structure or living arrangements. My mother had homeschooled me with assistance from Elder and Sage, creating an educational experience that was arguably superior to anything available through public institutions. But this meant I had no official transcripts, no documented academic achievements, and no clear pathway to higher education that might provide opportunities for advancement in human society. At 18, I was simultaneously overeducated in subjects that mattered for understanding natural systems and underprepared for navigating bureaucratic requirements that governed access to conventional success. The crisis began when I met Sarah Williams during one of my rare trips to the nearest town, where I'd accompanied my mother on errands that required human interaction. Sarah was 17, beautiful in ways that made me forget every rational consideration about protecting our family secret, and interested enough in our conversation to ask questions about my isolated lifestyle that I should have deflected with carefully prepared cover stories. "You live where exactly?" Sarah asked when I mentioned our remote cabin location. "I've lived in these mountains my whole life, and I know every family within 50 miles. What's your last name again, and which property are you talking about?" I should have ended the conversation immediately, should have recognized that Sarah's persistent curiosity represented exactly the kind of security threat that could destroy everything we'd built over 3 years of careful secrecy. Instead, I found myself answering her questions with partial truths that satisfied her immediate interest while creating foundation for lies that would inevitably collapse under sustained investigation. Over the following weeks, I began making unauthorized trips to town for the purpose of continuing my relationship with Sarah, telling my mother that I needed independence to prepare for adult responsibilities, while concealing my actual motivation. These deceptions created the first serious conflicts within our household, as Elder and Sage recognized that my behavior was creating vulnerabilities that threatened everyone's safety. Young humans need contact with their own people. Elder told my mother during a family meeting that addressed my increasing absence from cabin activities. But Michael's need for human friendship is making him forget that some secrets protect lives rather than limiting freedom. His new relationship could bring danger to our children if he shares knowledge that should remain private. My mother's response revealed her own internal conflict between supporting my developmental needs and protecting the family that had entrusted us with their survival. She understood that I needed preparation for eventually leaving our isolated sanctuary to pursue adult opportunities in human civilization, but she also recognized that my current behavior suggested I was prioritizing romantic interest over the loyalty I owed to beings who'd shown us nothing but kindness. "Michael, you can't have normal human relationships while keeping the most important part of your life secret," she explained during private conversations that became increasingly frequent as my trips to town continued. "Either you commit completely to protecting this family, or you choose to leave our sanctuary permanently and build relationships that don't require deception about who you really are." But I was 18 years old, driven by hormones and social needs that had been suppressed for 3 years, convinced that I could maintain my relationship with Sarah while continuing to protect our household secrets through careful compartmentalization. I believed I was mature enough to manage complex loyalties that required balancing love for my Bigfoot family against my desperate desire for connection with someone from my own species. The betrayal happened gradually, through conversations with Sarah that revealed progressively more details about our unusual living situation. Initially, I described our housemates as family friends, who helped with wilderness survival and property maintenance. When Sarah expressed interest in meeting these mysterious individuals, I elaborated with descriptions that emphasized their knowledge and helpfulness, while avoiding specific details about their appearance or origins. "They sound fascinating," Sarah said during a conversation that should have triggered every security alarm I'd been taught to recognize. "I'd love to visit your cabin and meet these wilderness experts who've taught you so much about forest living. My father always says there are old-timers in these mountains with knowledge that's been lost to modern civilization." That's when I made the choice that would haunt the remainder of my life. Instead of protecting the secret that ensured my family's survival, I invited Sarah to visit our cabin with the naive belief that I could somehow introduce her to elder and sage without revealing their true nature. I convinced myself that she would interpret their appearance as unusual but still human, that her admiration for their knowledge would overcome any suspicions about their biological origins. I was catastrophically wrong about Sarah's capacity for discretion, and even more wrong about her father's profession and connections to exactly the authorities we'd spent 3 years avoiding. August 15th, 1985, dawned clear and bright, with the kind of Adirondack morning that made our forest sanctuary feel like paradise, rather than the trap it had become through my teenage selfishness and Sarah Williams' father's dedication to law enforcement duty. I woke early to prepare for Sarah's first visit to our cabin, still believing I could somehow introduce her to our Bigfoot family, without revealing secrets that would destroy everyone I loved. Sarah arrived at noon, driving her father's pickup truck along access roads that led deeper into wilderness than she'd ever explored despite 18 years of living in nearby towns. She was excited to meet the wilderness experts I described during weeks of increasingly detailed conversations about our unusual household, completely unaware that her visit had been orchestrated by State Trooper James Williams as an intelligence-gathering operation designed to investigate reports of unusual large primate activity in our area. "This place is incredible," Sarah said while examining our cabin's obvious improvements and modifications. "Your family friends must be amazing craftsmen to have created such beautiful work in such a remote location. I can't wait to meet them and learn about their techniques." But Elder and Sage had recognized the danger that Sarah's visit represented, and had taken their children deep into the forest where federal agents wouldn't find them when the operation I'd unknowingly facilitated reached its inevitable conclusion. They'd left behind only their oldest son, Pine, who'd insisted on remaining to protect my mother and me when the consequences of my betrayal became manifest. The first sign of trouble came when Sarah asked to use our bathroom, and spent significantly longer inside than necessary, using equipment her father had provided to document evidence of non-human occupation. Hidden cameras recorded hair samples, measured footprints preserved in our shower, and photographed personal belongings that clearly belonged to beings much larger than any known human residents. "Sarah, what's taking so long?" I called through the bathroom door, beginning to understand that her behavior wasn't normal curiosity but systematic evidence collection. By someone who'd been briefed on what to look for during her visit, her response revealed the trap I'd walked into through my own desperate need for human connection. "Just a minute, Michael. I'm taking some pictures of those interesting wall modifications your friends created. My father will be fascinated by their construction techniques." That's when Pine emerged from concealment to confront the betrayal that was unfolding in the home his family had shared with us for 3 years. Standing nearly 7 feet tall at 16, he possessed his father's dignity and his mother's protective instincts, but none of their decades of experience in avoiding human detection through careful patience and strategic withdrawal. "You brought danger to my family," Pine said to me in English that carried the weight of disappointment beyond anything I'd ever experienced. 3 years we trusted you and your mother. 3 years we shared our knowledge and love, and you chose human friendship over loyalty to people who saved your life with their kindness." Sarah's scream when she saw Pine confirmed that her visit had never been about meeting interesting wilderness experts. She'd been sent to gather evidence about cryptid activity that her father's law enforcement network had been tracking through systematic investigation of unusual reports from throughout the Adirondack region. Dad, it's real," Sarah shouted into communication equipment that had been concealed in her backpack. "There's actually a Bigfoot here just like you suspected. Send the teams immediately." The federal response was swift and overwhelming, coordinated by agencies that had been preparing for exactly this type of discovery for months. Helicopters surrounded our property within 20 minutes of Sarah's transmission. while ground teams positioned themselves to prevent escape through any possible forest route that elder and sage might use to retreat deeper into wilderness areas. Agent Harrison, the federal coordinator, approached our cabin with weapons designed for capturing dangerous animals rather than conducting normal law enforcement operations. Michael Morrison, Sarah Williams, you're in possession of an unidentified biological entity that poses potential threats to ecological security and public safety. The specimen will be detained for comprehensive study by qualified research personnel. Pine's surrender was voluntary and dignified, demonstrating the moral courage that had characterized his people's response to every crisis they'd encountered during our shared residence. Instead of fleeing or resisting capture, he stepped forward to protect my mother and me from harm while accepting responsibility for the exposure that my selfish choices had created. "I won't fight you," Pine told Agent Harrison, while federal agents prepared containment equipment designed for transporting valuable research subjects. "My family taught me that violence only creates more violence, and I won't dishonor their wisdom by hurting people who are only following orders they don't understand." My mother's breakdown as they loaded Pine into the transport vehicle was complete and devastating. She fought federal agents with the fury of someone whose child was being stolen, screaming that Pine was a member of our family rather than a specimen to be studied, trying to position herself between him and his captors while he called her name in both English and his people's language. "Janet." "Michael," Pine cried as tranquilizer drugs took effect, his last words expressing love and forgiveness for the family that had shared 3 years of happiness with his people. "Remember that families are forever, even when they're separated. Remember that love makes us the same species no matter what others believe." Sarah Williams received commendation from federal agencies for her role in locating and securing what they described as the most significant cryptid capture in North American history. She never expressed remorse for the betrayal that destroyed the most loving family I'd ever known, never acknowledged that her actions had condemned innocent beings to lives of imprisonment and scientific torture. For 42 years I've lived with the knowledge that my teenage selfishness led federal agents to beings whose only crime was showing mercy to humans who didn't deserve their trust. Pine is 58 years old now, assuming he's survived 4 decades of research designed to unlock whatever biological secrets his species might reveal about evolution, consciousness, and potential military applications of non-human intelligence. My mother died 5 years after Pine's capture, never recovering from the grief of watching her adopted son stolen by people who would never understand that they'd destroyed something holier than anything they'd encounter in their lifetimes. The emphysema killing me is justice for someone whose desperate need for human romance destroyed the most beautiful interspecies family that ever existed.